Thanks for tuning in for another episode of the podcast. Hope you've been enjoying this season. Lots that I've found really helpful. Reach out with thoughts that you've had, reflections you've been having. Be super keen to hear from you and what you've been thinking about, what's been helpful for you, or any other things you want me to think about in this podcast and chat to people about. This episode was really good. I'm talking to Greg Masters. He's a guy, I go to church with him, but he's a guy that I wanted to talk to for one reason, and I got a really helpful bonus benefit in talking to him. So I wanted to talk to him just because I think he's a good guy and a guy I wanted to think about how he's parenting. So his kids are older. I wanted to think about growing up through those years and kids' development and how to help develop helpful things as they grow up and grow out beyond us. And so he's just a guy who I've known and is godly and I wanted to talk to. But in talking to him, I realized he's quite well trained in developmental psych, which is a really fascinating area to think about parenting. And stuff that I've listened to stuff. There's a podcast out there called Pop Culture Parenting. Shout out to that I found quite helpful. But so Greg actually had lots of developmental psych insights that were really helpful. And so I do imagine there'll be lots of benefit to this. So the conversation, I just kept picking his brain. So I think this is a longer episode because I just kept wanting to talk to him. He had lots of very, very helpful insights. And so there you go. I do hope it'll be helpful for you. Good time chatting to Greg. I also want to let you know about our sponsor of the show, Fruit, the Bible reading app to help Christians get a daily habit of reading the Bible. The link is in the description, and they've opened up the waitlist coming up to New Year's to help you set a new habit for the new year. So check them out if you're keen to get more consistent in your Bible reading. Maybe this will be a tool that could help you. I'd really recommend checking them out in the description. Without further ado, Greg, teach me to dad.
Yeah, so in terms of my background, so I've been 10 years in education, secondary school, helping kids in the classroom, out of the classroom. Got a particular interest in seeing what that looks like for kids in the outdoor space, both then and now. I've been obviously in and around my own kids and bring up 4 boys. My eldest is 21. Youngest is 14, so we've spent our years in the trenches.
Yeah.
And it's been some pretty wild rides, you know.
What phase do you think's been the wildest or the hardest?
Oh, I think there's 2 phases. The first phase I guess I'd probably isolate as the hardest was just when we had 4 kids, under 7. Shelley was at home. It's my wife. I was working. Luckily, we were able to get her to spend most of her time at home with the kids, which is a decision we made early on because we want to try and do the best we can in that space. So we'll make some sacrifices elsewhere, financially and other things to make that happen.
Yeah.
And she's not a hack. She's early childhood trained at uni. She's been a preschool teacher, worked with kids with ADHD and autism in the past, one-on-one stuff. So she's pretty well versed in stuff, but still probably, one of our kids was trickier than the others. And so, having that particular one in the mix of things caused for some pretty wild early times. She's got a baby on the hip, 2 in the pram, and then one on one of those skateboards you attach to the back.
Yeah.
And there was quite a few moments where you're leaving the trolley in the shops after filling it for the grocery shop each week because it's too gnarly to finish it.
Yeah.
You're so close, but it just didn't quite get there, and there's meltdowns, and it's just I'm walking out of here without anything in my pocket.
Cut my losses and go.
Oh, yeah, cut your losses. That's right. So,
yeah. So what's the other one? So
those are the early years.
Yeah.
Just with so many, needy ones, trying to juggle them all at the same time.
Yeah.
Sometimes I come home from work and they're just going absolutely nuts in that sort of phase as well. So you come in, you're not relaxed, you're tired from work, but you're like, all right, I'm ramping up here to kind of get things in order because I can hear through the walls and the windows when I get out of the car that things aren't going so well. So yeah, jumping in. So yeah, those early years are hard. Yeah, the other one was particularly in the teenage years.
Yeah.
Just when mental health hits, substantial mental health struggles, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to deal with. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Four of them. Four in that teenage thing.
Four in that teenage years, but usually they didn't all go hard at once. Normally they do a bit of tag team.
That's good.
So I'm thankful for that. So yeah.
Oh, it's good.
So yeah, all different, but yeah.
So so one of the things I'm interested in, because it's ahead of me. So my oldest is 6. So 6, 4, 1. Is like, as they get older, like in my age now, for the most part, I make all their choices for them. We're trying to help them be independent, but like generally speaking, there's a strong sense of we're the parents. We decide what happens. And as they grow up into adulthood, like through the years, how do you, I'm interested in the transition and what you could pass down on how you help them transition to the point where they're making their own choices, making their own mistakes, learning wisdom through that. You know what I mean? How was that process? Were there things in your mind that you tried to do or look back and think we had to do to help them move from under our roof, our rules, transitioning to their own adult?
Yeah, like what you're bringing up is pretty much parenting. Well, you're obviously when they're young, they're dependent on you to do all the sorts of normal things, get their food sorted and clothes and general hygiene and stuff like that. Yes. And when they become adults, they're doing their own thing in every aspect of life. I think what is really key to think through is I guess a habit of being on the way through is to not have to change everything at once.
Yep.
You don't have to teach and train and coach every single aspect of life at once. Now, often age-appropriate things to sort of focus on come naturally, in terms of like whether you're helping them to learn how to brush their teeth and not manage a budget yet. That kind of stuff. And everything in between. But you're right, it is hard to sort of work out, well, how do we get these little ones and forecast down the years to be leaving the nest, well-adjusted, growth mindset, resilient individuals that you throw out into the world. It's such a hard thing to work out.
Yeah.
So without having to go through every different life skill and aspect of life, you and your partner, wife, if you're doing it by yourself, man, kudos to you. It's a really hard thing to do by yourself. But for those where there's help around, whether it's parents or individuals in relationships, you've got to work out like a bit of a process. Where you're going to land with how much input and how hands-on you are.
Yes.
In the whole process.
So this is a question I've had related to that.
Yeah.
Is failure a good teacher, the best teacher? Like letting your kids fail and letting it, hands off, is that a good process? Have you seen that? Like, oh yeah, my kids got their first job. I let them learn that when I rock up late to the job, I'm going to get sacked. And that's a good, you know what I mean? Like how much do you think failure is a good teacher? I've been curious about
that. The research I think on it, and I haven't read every bit of research or anything like that, but for what I have read, just flat out blind, throw you in the deep end is not always the best teacher.
Yep.
And it actually can, giving that kind of learn the rules hard and fast, you just got to, throw them off the ledge, and they'll learn how to fly.
Yeah.
That can actually be super damaging and undermine their resilience going forward.
Yeah.
And so there's this thing in education called the zone of proximal development.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I remember.
Yeah. And so there's this little sweet spot where a little bit of push and a little bit of hardship with the right boundaries and age-appropriate sort of consequences is really healthy. But going beyond that and outside of that, going past that, is actually detrimental to stability, growth, and future successes.
Yes.
And experiences.
Yeah.
And, an ability to bounce back after trial and hardship.
Yeah, yes.
Is the key metric, I think, that psychologists talk about in terms of resilience.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yes, I've heard it talked about as like the right balance between order and chaos. And you throw someone in the deep end and it's just total chaos, but everything is the same as too comfortable order. There's this like safety, security of I know how this works, I know how to operate in this space, but I'm stretching beyond that into the unknown, so to speak. But there's only so much of that. Like there's something in that balance.
Yeah, and balance is obviously a word that gets thrown around. People talk about balance or tension, and the difference between those things. But I guess there's two things that I'd probably want to sort of bring in and implicate here as key pieces. One is that sort of over-parenting or some people call it helicopter parenting. The new version of that is lawnmower parenting. So helicopter parenting is the parent that's always hovering, that's trying to intervene and make a smooth path, kind of can see what's coming and sort of goes up ahead and dives in and alters things, whether it's going into the job behind the kid's back, their first job, and talking to the manager and trying to like make sure things are good in that space and that they're doing the right thing. It could be the soccer mum that's, running onto the field to place the ball for little Johnny so he can have a kick in, when it's probably the coach's job or one of the other players to that sort of morphed a bit in sort of the recent past to lawnmower parenting, which is no, I'm going to go full on, pave the way for my kid, make it as rosy as possible so that they can have the best life that they can.
Yes.
But that, in the research, they say is super detrimental.
Yes.
Both of those things.
So this is what I'm wondering about with the like failure thing. So like a simple example with kind of, kids my age, we're thinking like playground and like a playground where like how do you teach your kids to learn how to navigate a tricky climbing thing? Well, you can help them, like you can help them every step of the way. You can yell, be careful, whatever. Or you can calculate the risk and go, look, worst case scenario, they'll fall over and get a little bump. And if they do that, that's probably really good for them. That's like a mistake that I go, happy for you to stack it on this one. Happy for you to play. If you stack it, I think that's the best way forward here, as opposed to me coaching you through how to be careful. I just know that's not developing them in that space. And so like I'm broadly thinking about that in parenting of like how much do you pave the way, protect them, tell them, like dictate what they do as they kind of step into that zone of development and try the new things. How much is it helpful to let them try and fail and just figure it out versus pave the way? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. The research suggests that being more highly involved versus not is better.
Okay.
So, just generally in parenting.
Yep.
From small little incidents to learning how to do a new skill or ride a bike or up to bigger skills, life skills, whether it's friends and relationships and girlfriends, boyfriends, all that kind of stuff. So they generally say that being more involved is better than not in terms of their stability, their resilience building over time. But there is the thing which is the overparenting. That's the overly involved parent. But there's no textbook on where that line is.
Yeah.
And there's so many factors that contribute to what that is.
Yeah.
Like there's the relationship you already currently have with the child or the teenager. There's the general ability. Like if my kid is super unco, I'm not going to let them walk on the edge of a cliff.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I know they're likely to trip over.
Yeah, yeah.
And that kind of thing. So what I want to do instead is almost create the conditions for that little bit of push. They might make a mistake, or they probably will make a mistake, but the consequences aren't going to be dire, such that their self-esteem, their stability mentally,
yes,
or severe injury is not going to ensue.
Yeah, gotcha.
Like in saying that, we've been at the hospital a lot over the years.
Okay, so that's helpful. So there's something about setting. What was the phrase? Setting the terrain or something.
Yeah, creating the conditions.
So that's not the same as the lawn mowing paving the way.
No,
you're almost like curating the obstacle course as opposed to flattening the way.
100%.
You know what I mean? Like at the point where it's like they can do this and it will stretch them. Something in that zone, so to speak.
Yeah, and so even in the physical space, like we always had pretty crazy kind of backyard apparatus, like home built, of course, but the kind of cubby house that's like got a rickety old bridge that's chain bridge that's got no handrail. It's like, well, they got to learn how to not fall off something like that.
Yeah,
and they can gingerly walk across it the first time and that kind of thing. But there's a certain height, and if they fall off, they're going to get hurt. Yeah, but they're not going to die.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
So can I, to flesh out this idea, can I give you some examples and you give me a sense of like, I let them figure it out, I intervene strongly, or some middle space and how that would look for a few different scenarios to see where this lands.
Sure.
Yeah? I'll start simple.
Okay.
They're into skating. Do you just make them wear a helmet and knee pads?
Where are they skating?
At the skate park.
At the skate park?
Yeah. They're 10 years old and they're hitting the skate park.
Well, I wouldn't be like just throwing them with a skateboard to the skate park without being there with them the first couple of times.
Yeah.
And I'd be talking to them about what are the more risky sort of scenarios, like dropping in at the bowl without a helmet or knee pads. It's not going to end well their first few times. And so I'd be getting them to be challenging them, going with them the first few times and giving them sort of things that are a bit closer to their level.
Yep.
So that they can start to get, whether it's rolling up.
The
little elbow or the hip.
Cool.
Or the quarter pipe and then rolling back down. It's that kind of stuff.
That's helpful. But I imagine you're just something like a helmet. It's just like, look, you have to do it. That's not one that you're like, well, let's see and learn the lesson.
Yeah, if they hit their head, they can get a head injury and that can impact their learning, their life at home, and long term. So there's certain rules, like it's easy one's a bike helmet.
Yeah.
You're going for a ride, you're putting your bike helmet on. It's the law. There's a reason why it's the case.
So I'm with you. I raise that as a test one. Yeah. Where there's a realm of like, this is what you're doing. Yeah. You know what I mean? I'm not. The helmet's not an opportunity for them to learn from the mistake or something. It's just like, look, you're wearing a helmet. But the level of what we're enduring in a skate park, that's something. So I'm with you there. What about this? There's a kid at school who's mean to them. Maybe it's just an ongoing bully thing or a challenging thing. So I could imagine you could go do principal work, parent work behind the thing, send the kid into it. What are some of the principles as you think about helping them figure out how to navigate mean or difficult peers?
Well, first thing I do is I never think that my kid's perfectly innocent.
Yep.
So they've always got something to contribute in the instance.
Yeah.
So there's stuff for them to learn. But also, I'm not telling them it's their fault.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking that in the back of my head.
Yeah.
So I'm speaking as though they're, and giving advice as though they're in the right. But in the back of my head, I'm thinking sort of realistically about my kids and the situation and what could have gone down.
Yeah.
Different if it's a bullying incident that's repetitive, ongoing, there's a power dynamic or power differential going on and that kind of thing. That's a definite, when you suspect that, that's a definite go to the teacher, go to the school, what's going on, Yeah, all that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. Sharing concerns in that space. In terms of what I'm instructing my child to do, so many factors
Mm.
again. And so, is it the first time? Is it the 25th time? How much is it impacting? Is it I'm just sad about it? Is it I don't want to go to school? Probably the key thing is to, with that school refusal thing, that can become a really big problem.
Mm.
And so to let them just have lots of time off school and avoid that situation is not always the best,
Yeah, yeah.
because it can turn into something quite substantial
Mm.
and almost acts like a phobia
Yep.
then.
Yep.
And kids who have school refusal often have that kind of reaction, sometimes even PTSD, when they think about that school
Yeah,
space.
yes.
And so, I mean, if it's that severe, then you'd be definitely getting
Mm.
outside help.
Yeah, yes.
And the graduated exposure is clinically the best thing
Yeah,
for
cool.
them. So there's a whole bunch of different
Yeah, yeah.
different sort of approaches depending on the level
Mm.
of how difficult that situation is for the child.
No, that's helpful. So tell me if I've got this then. Just trying to piece some principles together. So there's you're wanting you want your kids as they develop, you want to help them learn how to navigate these new things, new spaces by uh almost setting the right challenge for them.
Right
That's
level.
just
Yep.
a little bit ahead.
Yep.
Just a little bit. Too big of a jump, you just set them up to fail and useless failure.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a challenge. You're entering new spaces,
Mm.
even in just a few of those examples, you're doing that thing. You're setting the terrain, and you're intervening not to pave the way of ease and not to protect them, but to almost set it up so that there's an achievable, they can achieve a new space. Is that somewhat
Yeah.
capturing
And
what you're trying to do?
yeah, exactly. And you're not trying to, I mean, you see some parents trying to give their kids the experience of something in the best way it can be, in the hope that they'll then just learn how to do it
Yeah.
and be able to experience it themselves,
Mm.
or have the drive or desire. Like the kid is trying to learn to ride a bike, and so the parent will just run around the bike track with them for
Mm.
an hour, showing them this is what it feels like. That doesn't actually teach them how to ride.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so, what you need to give kids is personal agency, confidence that they can isolate in certain instances what they can do to change their current circumstances or change the outcome of what's ahead.
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
They can't do, when they can't do anything, and there's literally nothing they can do, you need to intervene.
Mm.
But what you're trying to build in them is the vision and the thinking that will help them and give them agency to be able to work out and problem solve for themselves.
Yeah, yes.
And that's quite often through confidence in mastering small challenges and getting past small challenges,
Mm.
even in the home or in a safer space, and then obviously building and letting that go.
Yeah, that's helpful. So this is real helpful to think about. This feels like some of the big hot button issues for parents at the moment is protection, overprotection, worried about underprotection, worried about traumatizing their kids or disadvantaging them, and how to find that. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
that's super helpful.
yeah.
Yeah.
And look, I guess also in the research, there's a whole bunch of thinking into protective factors that things that will help kids be able to face these challenges and not fall apart.
Yes.
Because when kids have a meltdown over something or fall apart, they're not able to actually cognitively think clearly because their brain's been short-circuited and their amygdala, the feeling part of the brain, is taken over. And that quite often throws them into flight or fight or freeze responses.
Yes.
And they're not able to cognitively. So sometimes I see kids in meltdowns and parents over-explaining,
Yes.
trying to help get their frontal lobe, their decision-making part of their brain, engaged, but their brain is not set to that at that moment. They're in flight, fright, or freeze mode.
Yeah.
And they can't. They literally can't. And distraction in that moment. And probably that moment is not the time to do your teaching.
Yeah.
And so hence why giving them smaller challenges that are a bit closer will help them to be in a good headspace cognitively to be able to deal with these things too.
Yeah, okay.
So once the kid's freaking out, they're in the surf, it's too big for them, and you're just going to push them on this wave, they're literally having a meltdown. You've lost the battle already.
Yeah.
Because it's way too far past, and you're putting them in a state of anxiety. Now, protective factors, some kids are just not as good at that stuff.
Yeah.
And that's from birth. The two things, obviously, like all things, genetics, yes, they're born with it, but also their first 5 years of life.
Yeah.
And so certain kids with trauma responses have experienced something in early childhood or whatever that's caused them to be maybe not as fit for getting past those challenges and being resilient.
Yes.
But it can also be taught. Maybe the ceiling's different for certain kids.
Yeah.
Like my kids are all different as well.
Yeah.
And some of their resilience building has been, had different ceilings. And so I'll push the kid with a higher ceiling a bit more because I know my kid and they can cope a bit better.
Yes.
Other protective factors are things like personal relationships, obviously with family and friends, that they've got a stable, safe place that they can retreat back to. And there's several different
protective factors play in. Tell me if I've got this right.
Yep.
Protective factors play in because they almost enable them to attempt challenges, fail from challenges, and be okay with that. Is that where they play in?
Be okay with it and bounce back.
Yeah.
And some kids are just naturally able to sort of sideline those feelings. They don't get that brain short circuiting, and so are more readily able to deal with options, problem solving in the moment than other kids.
Yeah. So help me integrate this with kind of a Christian principle of suffering, building perseverance and character, and how that relates to us almost not paving the way, but setting kids up for success, right? How does that connect with, does that make us, I'm thinking like, how do we avoid being parents that want their kids never to experience suffering? And where do we see the role of suffering in developing our kids, and how do we integrate that in? Do you have thoughts?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's programmatic, right, for the Christian in all of the scriptures to go through hardships and suffering. And so it's an expectation that will happen. And we see it time and time again with the people of Israel. We see it time and time again through the New Testament with trials and tribulations and struggles, and how that produces perseverance and perseverance, hope. I mean, hope itself is that very key thing in positive psychology. Martin Seligman, that's one of his three key things to happiness is hope. And the Christian has that in spades.
Yeah.
And so if you have a rich devotional life at home, if you have a rich Christian heritage in your family, and that hope for eternal life, that hope in heaven, that hope that life is not all that there is, if that's the narrative that's been spoken to them forever, it's going to help them in everything. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
So hope.
It's good.
In the scriptures, it's why we get suffering, part of a massive, big discussion, but one of the things that suffering does is it produces perseverance. Perseverance produces hope. And hope does not disappoint because it's founded in God. So yeah, there's that expectation for the Christian and for our kids in that. We can sometimes over-explain that to our kids in the moment. Might not be the right time when they're screaming about a sore knee, or even worse, like a bone sticking out of their leg. Don't worry, son. Going to be in heaven soon. They've got a bone sticking out their leg and they're screaming because it's so painful. That's not the right time to be doing that. But if you've already done that from when they're little, and that's part of the narrative of their understanding of who they are in the world, then that's going to help them. For us as parents, we have that same hope, and so that gives us confidence in every day of life, really, that this life is not it, and it doesn't actually matter if Johnny's not the best skateboarder in the world, and I don't have to push him and push him and push him so that he is. Because I don't want him to have that identity either.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
that's not going to do him well. What happens if he has a life in a season or career-ending injury? I've built all his hopes on that very pursuit. If you can't do it anymore, what's that going to do to him? It's going to destroy him. He's going to be distraught. And so all the way through these instances, I'm trying to have a layer that causes us to make less of this life and the things that are in this life, because it's the next one that's the real deal.
Yeah,
that
yeah.
matters most.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things about that.
Yeah, helpful.
And that should give us confidence that we can actually push our kids. They're going to be okay.
Push them, knowing that they may fail, quote marks, and suffer, and that's cool. We're happy to let that happen.
Depends on who the kid is. Again,
Yeah,
you need to know your kid. So for some kids, letting them fail in a certain, let's say it's teenager in relationships. Now, there's some things that happen in teenage love relationships that are hard to come back from. And so just letting them trottle off and have a go at this relationship thing without any input is not wise, because the consequences of them not going well in that space can be detrimental to them for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
As well as their Christian life. And so we're not just letting teenagers do whatever the hell they like, but we're talking to them hopefully not just when they become teenagers, but all the way through, giving them hopes and expectations about what that's going to be like. So if you parent love relationships when they're 16, it's too late.
Yeah.
You can't teach them. Then they've already got all that they want to have, all that they desire in those relationships. They've already got that from pop culture and media.
Yeah,
which is not always the best, right?
Yeah.
And so starting some of those things earlier is really important. You have to, with your partner, work out what you're going to do in that space.
Yeah.
So letting them fail in certain areas of life, it's going to be actually too detrimental for them long term to come back from it.
Yeah.
But your example, turn up to work late, see what happens. You could warn them. You say, usually when you get a job, one of the clearest expectations is you turn up on time. And your teenager might go, yeah, no, I don't think so. They'll be right. I'll just text them. And they'll be cool. And that's in the case you go, well, I'll let you fail. I'm not going to do any more with that. You're going to have to learn the hard way. They might lose their job. They might get a reprimand or whatever it might be for being late consistently. And that might help them change.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah.
But
yeah,
just letting kids fail doesn't mean that they'll learn the lesson.
Yeah, gotcha.
Both the first time, multiple times. Some kids are actually resistant to learning that lesson.
Yeah.
And that can be based on a whole bunch of things. Personality. Some have particular, difficulties, developmental difficulties, mean they struggle to learn those things by themselves.
Yeah.
Sometimes it means that they'll struggle to learn those things by themselves and with your input. And so, it throws me into thinking about like raising kids. It's not just one person. It's hard when it's one person, but when there's a community of friends, family, also being able to speak into their lives and show them stuff. It's sort of big roundabout way of
that's
kind
helpful.
of bringing in a few other things
and even
to think about.
Even like suffering in the New Testament, it doesn't by default generate growth, I would think. That's why there's lots of scriptures about it, trying to orient us to see our sufferings and grow from them. That we see we need to count our sufferings in a certain way. Count them as pure joy, endure hardship as discipline. We need as opposed to it just bashes us into growth by default. There's something not there seems to be more at play than just
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Of course, it takes the eyes of faith
Mm.
through those adversities,
Yeah.
through those sufferings, to be able to see God rightly, to be able to see yourself rightly, and to be able to make sense of those things and assimilate them into your narrative and the
Yeah.
story of life.
It seems funny, like instinctively as a parent, you always want your kids, I would say in the immediate and the long term, but definitely the immediate as well, to not be suffering.
Mm.
And I find that hard to, because I find it hard to think about in practice how it will be good for them to experience hardship, and that I need to let it happen at points, because it just feels so counterintuitive. Like, how miserable should I let my kid be? My instinct is, well, ideally not at all.
Yeah,
I think of it and I think it will, but that feels like that kind of attitude is going to make me the overprotective parent.
yeah, it certainly can. Don't say it has to,
Mm.
but it can. Um, yeah, I guess I'm thinking of instances uh, where uh, that is the default for a person,
Mm.
um, but that can actually be kind of applied holistically across every aspect of life.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we actually got to use some wisdom about certain things that aren't going to be too detrimental.
Mm.
And you got to know your kid too,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
different kids have a different tolerance.
No, it's good. Mm.
We used a pretty firm hand, like over the years,
Yeah.
with the kids in behavior management, behavior leadership stuff in the home,
Mm.
and all sorts of things. Um, and largely, they all got the same system, but they probably didn't all respond the same to that system that we put in place.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we went pretty hard with that first, and the others sort of came to line really easily
Mm.
with that same system, whereas not all of them did. And so we sometimes talk about it now and question, well, yeah, I wonder what it would have been like if we'd been not quite as hard nosed in that particular aspect of life,
Yeah,
and whether
yeah.
that had changed. So yeah,
Yeah.
you can go down a rabbit hole of regret in that space as well, and bringing up all your failures, which we all have, by the way. Like, we've made some pretty spectacular mistakes in parenting over the years. Yeah, and sometimes you think, well, was that too far? Was that going too hard, letting them suffer too much?
Yeah, yeah.
And sometimes we didn't know as well that
Mm.
they were suffering as much as they were
Mm.
in the moment. So we've got to be a bit kind to ourselves as well as we go through and even look back.
Yeah, yeah.
We're not going to do it perfectly.
Mm.
We're certainly not the perfect parents. And so, yeah, we've got to be a bit kind to ourselves as we analyse some of these things as well.
Mm.
But to do nothing and to just either apply broad brushstroke, I'm not going to let my kid or my child suffer at all throughout life. That's not going to end well.
Yeah.
But also, it's not going to end well if you just let them go off and do
Yeah.
whatever they want all the time without any constraints, boundaries,
Yeah, yeah.
safety nets
Yeah,
as
good.
well.
That's good.
So not thinking about it is probably the problem.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's really helpful to have in mind some things and even some short-term behaviors that you want to work on or experiences you want to work on to help them to transcend some of the difficulties they find. And certainly a little bit of safe suffering is a good little policy to sort of create the conditions for growth. With
cool.
Safe suffering.
Yeah, good. No, safe suffering. I get it. I'm with you. So, slightly related. Still thinking about how you transition kids up and how you help that process, right? Two questions. One, particularly at the maybe in the age where you lay down the rules more firmly. Maybe, yeah.
You as in
The parent.
the parent. Yep.
Are God's rules the house rules in a Christian home? Or does that kind of play out differently? Do you know what I mean? Like, just the Bible ethic of how we live, are those the house rules? Is that how we think about what we're enforcing with our kids? Or is that... I've pondered that and I bounce around a little bit on it. Yeah. What do you think?
I think that we can. I think that we can apply too harshly some biblical principles that we hold dear at the expense of others, and so we might choose some that, for whatever reason, personality or upbringing, or that we have a particular thing about, and we apply those more rigorously in our home than other ones.
Like what? What do you have in mind?
I don't know. Some people think like cleanliness is
Yeah.
next to godliness, that kind of thing. and there's a really good reason for having order in your home.
Yeah.
For lots of people, ordered space, ordered mind, ordered life, and that could even like impact spiritual things. Like, yeah, and self control is a thing.
Yeah.
Self control to clean your room, self control to put your clothes away,
Yeah.
self control to clean your teeth, self control to not scream out in anger, and yeah, hurt someone in anger. Self control is a really key personality trait and also skill to learn. But if you apply that to cleanliness in the home, and you have a child who cannot ever meet that standard because of maybe stuff going on for them, lots of parents might see it as laziness, but some kids have particular issues that mean their brain functions a lot differently. So if you're expecting them to jump over the bar every time and they can't do it, then that's not in their zone of proximal development, is it?
Yeah, yes.
And so you run the risk of undermining resilience in them. And so you need to maybe hone back for certain kids where the bar is, drop the level so they can have some wins in that space. So parenting all your kids the same, just like that, and having no area for grey, it's just black and white the whole time, is going to end you probably in a bad place. So there'd be certain things that you don't want to budge on, and there'd be other things that you want to give some grace in, you want to give some flex in.
Yeah.
You know, like what style of clothes they wear, what haircut they might have.
Yeah, sure.
You know, those things that are, what music that is. There's a few things.
Yeah, sure.
That you don't want to be applying too rigorously.
But like generally speaking, and maybe this is too simplistic way to think about it, but like if something is a command in the Bible, is that a command in the home? So like a simple one, God tells us not to lie. Yeah, you know what? That's one of our house. That's what we expect. That's part of the expectation. God tells us to dress modestly. That'll come out particularly through the teenage years. There'll be a point where that's what we're doing. Yeah. God tells us about church. We do that. God, you know what I mean? Like, is there a clean transition from this is what God tells us to do to this is what we expect from our house? Do they match up, do you think?
On some things.
Could you imagine something that God says to do it, but you wouldn't enforce it in the home?
Well, I guess the question is, would you be willing to enforce it for yourself? So God says to do this. So in our house, so God says not to lie.
Yeah.
So then we don't lie in our house. We tell the truth. So we reprimand, we use our behavior modification strategies, the punishments, our reward system, whatever we use to modify our kids' behavior for that particular thing. We apply it across the family. And then they start to get older and they realize that you've not been telling them the truth on a whole bunch of stuff over the years. And what does that do for them? And so in that moment, you get caught out by not applying the rules to yourself that you have been applying for the kids. And so you've got to be careful that you're not setting yourself up for failure there as a parent in saying, yeah, we enforce these rules. Oh, but you didn't tell us about this. That's lying to us. And so you can come a cropper with that, and that can undermine a whole bunch of years of holding that rule steadfast.
Yes.
And the ethics in the Bible are like that a lot of the time. Not all the time.
No. Yeah.
But a lot of the time. But you've got to decide as a couple what you're going to enforce, what are your key things. You can't tackle every behaviour at once, as I said. You got to choose your battles sometimes. And so, yeah, just taking God's every rule that says in every command in the Bible, we're going to apply that rigorously throughout our house. That's going to set you up, I reckon, for a tough time.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're constantly you're applying God's rules to sin in your life, your whole family's life, and you're constantly like reprimanding one another for sinning.
Interesting.
See the trick.
So
that
that's
you can
interesting
come to?
when you're wanting to instill grace and mercy and as well, and you're almost constantly on everyone's back about everything. Is an interesting what gets communicated through that. Like as I've thought about this, I've thought of things like Christian schools, and like you watch a chapel service in a school, and it's like a kid gets in trouble for doing the wrong thing while we're praying, and it's like, man, we're praying, like stop mucking around, and it's like there's something about that that's stronger than you get at a church. That it's like in church, there's a sense of like, hey mate, we're all on our own journey and we're trying to grow grow in reverence.
Yeah.
But like, I'd never smack someone on the back of the head when they were on their phone when we were praying. I'd be like, all right, well, you're in a different place. And, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there's something about the school structure comes with its own set of authority. And so the rules get like, there's a blurring of what is strictness from school versus strictness from applying the Bible. And I've thought about that with house and like, if it's like we apply God's rules to our house along with clean your room, does that muddle up in their mind what it means to be a Christian? Because sometimes I'm enforcing, I don't know. Anyway, these are kind of the things that I ponder what happens when you get applying the Bible mixed with another authority structure like parenting.
I mean, yeah, there's no shortage of instances where harshly applied biblical principles in the home has led to inoculation of kids against the gospel.
Yeah.
That's a real danger for people. What I wouldn't say is that the things that we pick on, these are just the rules that our house has. So, I mean, we did some Ds or whatever, and there was more strict punishment and reprimand and behaviour modification stuff for these set things. As a family, we're gonna isolate these things as key things that we sort of don't flex on, and there'll be repercussions for, and less rigid on other things.
Yeah.
And you got to decide what those things are. But if you apply everything all the time, you're right. You're just constantly enacting behavior modification, usually punishments. We don't usually have a very good sense of reward system in our houses, and the like. Even though that's the psych research says that positive reinforcement is the best way to change behavior, not positive punishment. And so, but that's the thing that we think is the quickest and react to the most. There's a whole 6 other podcasts probably on behavior modification strategies and a whole bunch of things like that. But
and worth doing.
Certainly thinking about the things that you're applying in the home and what you're saying about that. Kids always muddle up, at least in the school setting. Oh, school said to me to tuck my shirt in. That means Jesus wants me to tuck my shirt in. I get in trouble if from Jesus if I don't tuck my shirt in. They quickly make those links that are not said. I know it for a fact. They're not said, but they get picked up as implicit learnings. Not explicit ones, implicit learnings. And so thinking about the home, if you're saying, we're a family of believers and we follow God's laws, you just told a lie, that's against God's laws, you're in trouble. Like making all those links in the moment of behavior modification, I reckon is unhelpful. And again, like if you only ever talk about, what God's plans for our lives, expectations for us as we live as Christians in this world, when they get in trouble, then you're up. I think promoting those links being made.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. Is my assumption right that as kids grow up through the teenage years, your enforcement of rules and your authority, so to speak, you just gradually back it off as they start making their own choices until they off they go and you're just a consultant? Is that a
Depends how
fair
patient
understanding?
you are.
Yeah. Is that a fair assumption of the ideal of what those years are? Is like you move from a little bit of like, this is what we're doing, we do it, to more of like, all right, well, look, yeah, if you want to do that, okay. Like, am I right that that's at least what sort of though you want to be doing in those years? Is that kind of the idea?
I reckon.
It is
Like,
in my head.
yeah, there's sort of lots of stories I hear around the place of um, kids getting to a point where they're either ready to move out at 26 or even worse. And now they've got to fend for themselves. And they're literally, their mother has washed their clothes, cleaned their dishes, cleaned their room, almost brushed their hair every day since they were
Yeah.
born. Um, that's the situation you want to avoid at all costs.
Yeah, yeah.
They don't grow up. They don't learn to fend for themselves. There's this new life stage that the researcher Erickson had to insert into his stage theory called emerging adult. It went from 18 to adult. It's adolescent to adult. We don't have that anymore. We've got this new
Yep.
life stage called emerging adult. And I reckon there's links between that stage emerging and us being overly involved, overprotective,
Yeah,
and and trying to pave the way for our kids such that they can, well, they got a job, so I'll have to wash their clothes because they work now. And so they don't have time to do schoolwork and work and do all their chores. So I'll help them. And so their expectation is, oh, someone else will do my
yes.
do my housework. And so, I mean, that's a simple example of, you want your kids to be growing up. They should be doing chores from as early as possible, contributing to the family. Doesn't always work
But yeah,
the way
yeah,
you'd
I
like
get
it to in terms of how much the uptake of that.
No, that's cool.
But
yeah,
yes, certainly you don't want them. You want them to be, someone once mentioned in a sermon many years ago, and I've sort of taken this on. Like, your kids they're a blessing from the Lord, but they're not yours to keep to fulfill all your dreams and hopes for yourself. They're actually arrows that you're supposed to fire into the world that God's given you to nurture, to help grow, to keep that arrow sharp, to help them to learn how to keep the shaft of their arrow straight, to the fletchings, the feathers at the back. They need to be kind of manicured and honed. They need to learn how to do that so that when you fire them out into the world, they're able to fly. And so rather than holding them close to us, and we heard in the sermon today about family and where that nuclear family should sit in the scheme of in our schema as Christians, in view of eternity, in view of God's bigger family. And so, I reckon we try and manicure our kids for ourselves and our own purposes, to build our kingdom and to have our family and our own experiences all together. And so that can actually, run us a cropper in a whole bunch of the implementation of all this stuff through our parenting and our reluctance to let them grow up and fail and nurture them into young adults that we can fire out into the world for his purposes.
Yeah, yes. Oh, that's good. Well, maybe one more thought from me, and then I'll just ask you if there's anything you want to add into the mix, right? What do you think? And maybe you'll have your own reflections of we're glad we did this, or well, it would have been helpful if we did this. Kind of the things that are helpful to do pre-teenage years. What things would you almost advise someone to be doing from ages, hypothetically speaking, 6 to 13, so that when they're 13 onwards, you've set up something well so that phase goes well? Or is that just a naive question from a young dad that thinks they can have any control over those teenage, you know what I mean? But like, are there things that you're like, yeah, no, I think these are the helpful things pre-teenage years that helps that phase and transition into adulthood? And
Yeah, I reckon there's heaps. not to overwhelm,
No,
but
please.
but almost you want to be talking about lots of these sort of expectations with your kids early on, not just telling them this is the way it should be, but be inquisitively asking them questions that lead them down the thought path of what's it going to be like when? What's it going to be like when you leave home? Who's going to do your washing? What sort of person do you reckon is a good person to look for in a spouse? At the age of 6, what's a good husband look like? What's a good wife look like? And you're using little moments that come up, whether it's watching a family movie together, being the annoying dad that pauses it. Did you see what they just said? Is that a good thing to say to to your loved ones, from being the annoying dad that pauses the movies?
I love the annoying dad.
Yeah. To the you're reading books at night before bed, and you see the Berenstain Bears dad. That's the useless Homer Simpson type that can never do anything right. That's reading to them all the time that's what dads are like. Is that what you're going to be like as a dad? What do you think is a good trait for a dad to have, or a good thing for a dad to say in this situation? So stuff that they can actually look forward to, see themselves in those situations, and what sort of behaviours, personalities, character traits, phrases, words that they can think about for themselves being in those spots and speaking into those early. Like, and sometimes you can be blunt. Like, you're not allowed a girlfriend until you're at least 16. Don't even think about it.
Yeah.
That's not happening. Or, at 23, you're not living here anymore.
Yeah.
You're actually out of here. And so that actually helps. Some of those milestones actually helps them to work out, hang on, if I've got to be out of the home at 23 and then I can only date at 16, I've got to start to think seriously about who that person's going to be. Because if I'm going to move out and get married, which, you can move out and not get married, but if I'm going to move out and get married at 23-ish, then I've got to actually start to get serious and not just date for the sake of dating, but think of seriously about who I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. What sort of person, what sort of faith are they going to have, and what's that going to do in time? All those things.
Oh, that's cool.
So there's a couple of things about those specific ones. We talk a lot about what the nuclear family looks like as part of the bigger church family, God's family, and that they're a strong part of that community. It's not just, we go to church on Sundays. No, but we're actually a part of this gospel community of brothers and sisters. We're all looking forward to heaven together, and we're all contributing to what God's got for us on earth in building his church. So all those things, like, I know it's early on a Sunday morning, but we get to see our brothers and sisters who we're going to be hanging out with for eternity. Throwing all those things positively when it's hard, reminding them about those truths actually helps over the weeks, over the years, over those years 6 to 13 or earlier even, about those things. Talking intentionally all the way through about those future moments, key times.
Let's go. Oh, that's good.
Doesn't always work perfectly, but the way you'd like it.
Yeah.
But you've had a go and the expectations are there, means that, it's very clear what they conceive of their trajectory and their dominant narrative could be for good, healthy living.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Well, look, anything else? Maybe just broad open question. Is there anything else you want to add into this mix? I've kind of poked around on some of the things I'm curious on, and so that's been really helpful. But is there anything you want to add into the mix that we haven't quite hit?
Probably a couple of things, actually. One's a practical thing. Quite often we in families we have our ideal kind of vacations, or we're this kind of family. We're a resort family. We're a Europe holiday family. We go on planes. We go to the snow. We go surfing. We camp. There's all different things, right? But certain pictures, certain experiences in those different options actually set our kids up for those moments, create conditions, and some don't as much. And what we've found over the years is camping is actually quite hard. Certainly when the kids are young, and actually them seeing you model what it looks like to go through hard things is really key. And so part of what we've done is create conditions on a simple camping trip where you're battling against elements. It's really windy today, or it's pouring with rain. It's actually leaking. The tent's leaking, and showing them how to actually, and modeling how to go through those hard things is really, really helpful. There's this thing called transference that happens when they learn resilience skills and agency in one context and bring it back and apply it to other contexts. And that happens more readily when you get blue and green in your field of view, when you're in the outdoors, when you've got blue sky, got green trees and grass, and you actually go through adversity in that space. From small adversity to dealing with wind in your tent to actually climbing a mountain that's really hard and you've got a pack on your back and you feel like dying or being killed rather than climbing the hill because it's painful and it's hard.
Yeah.
Like doing hard things is really helpful. So, yeah, creating conditions in the outdoors, it's really good. And there's certain pursuits that are just harder than others. Playing computer games is not hard.
Yeah.
You press some buttons, you get to respawn every moment. There's nothing riding on it.
Yeah.
Compared to learning how to mountain bike ride where you get thrown off and break your arm, potentially, or on the side of a hill, or going off jumps, or it's muddy and slippery. Even simple stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, surfing's the same. So many pursuits, outdoor pursuits, are like that.
Yeah, that's cool.
As well.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to mention that we hadn't really talked about was sometimes our fears for our kids are not because of what they might experience, but because of experiences we've had that we actually apply to them and think that they'll be feeling this or that or the other. Now, it's not true that kids are resilient, full stop. So just let them be subject to anything. That's not true. That's a myth. But at the same time, we can actually project onto them fears that we have because of our other experiences or our recent experiences, which puts us in a headspace that's more fearful. And that actually influences the way they feel about a situation, from a physical pursuit, from being uncomfortable in an outdoor space, feeling uncomfortable going to church or even to school, or we can actually project onto them stuff. And sometimes our fears are realised even before they actually happen for our kids because of the way that we've talked to them about it, talked about other people in that space, providing them more reason to fear than is necessary.
Yeah, yes. Oh, I can totally get that. They just vibe it out.
Yeah.
I imagine kids just pick up like, wow, it's a terrible thing to be late. Because when we're running late, man, the temperature in the house really changes. And everyone's terrified of being late. Okay, cool. We've taught them to be scared of something there,
Yeah. And it can happen in more intense ways.
Yeah.
And more ways that are more deleterious to their...
Yes, that was a very trivial one.
their existence and their confidence that they'll be okay in that space. Yeah, there's going to be some challenges there, but they'll be okay.
Yeah. That's
undermined by sometimes the way we... apply lots of pressure to that situation.
Oh, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
There is a third thing.
No,
often we think that God stands outside of suffering. We see from the scriptures that actually, no, he's in charge of all things. God is the sovereign Lord. There's nothing that happens outside of his control. And so sometimes we think that stopping our kids from suffering is the good thing. But God's in charge of all things. If it's going to be, it will be. And God is good in it. He has good for you in it, regardless of what happens. It's not going to be nice. It's not going to be comfortable.
Yeah.
But God is over all these things, and he's a faithful God, and you should be confident that he has everything in control, even your parenting, even the situations that he puts your kids in or that you put your kids in. And so despite there being trickiness, despite there being potential for harm, God is still over all these things. And he's a good God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's good. Oh, I appreciate it a lot, Greg. I don't know.
Well, thanks. It's been a good time. Yeah, you got lots of good questions.
Oh, I love it.